Okay, we'll start with this. Well, early next month, unbeaten prospect of
Coffee, Elise Scotney.
She is going to be taking on former champion of Argentina, Jorgelina Guanini.
This is a considerable step up in competition for Elise.
Will be the most experienced fighter that Elise Scotney has fought so far, a former champion.
The former IBF super flyweight champion.
The former IBF champion at super flyweight that has since moved up to super bantamweight. She's coming off of 2 consecutive losses, so there is some angling there. Better still, this is a step up in competition. This is a considerably more experienced fighter than any fighter that Elise Scotney has fought so far. I like the fight. Jorgelina, she's coming off of 2 back-to-back losses, one to Rachel Ball and another to
Jennifer Miranda.
Last month, late last year, in December, when she faced unbeaten up-and-comer of Spain, Jennifer Miranda. She's facing another unbeaten up-and-comer now from the United Kingdom in Elise Scotney.
Now, because Jorgelina's coming off of 2 back-to-back losses, there is some angling there.
There is, but there always is. This early in a fighter's career. It's very early in Elise Scotney's professional career. She's only got 3 pro fights, so some angling and developmental fights, bring-along fights, those kinds of fights are expected, but this is a solid choice in spite of those 2 back-to-back losses Jorgelina's coming off of, because Jorgelina is a former champion. She is very experienced. I do vaguely recall her giving Rachel Ball a harder fight than I expected.
A little over a year ago.
She fought Rachel in the bubble at fight camp, and I did pick Rachel to win that fight, and Rachel did win that fight, but she really had to work for it. Jorgelina Guanini gave her that much more to have to work around. A tricky fighter.
Rachel Ball had 2 times as many fights when she fought Jorgelina as Ellie has now.
That's right. Rachel Ball had at least 7 professional fights, 7 professional contests under her belt, whereas Ellie's a very spry, very ripe 3-0 at this time. It's a 122-pound contest, a super bantamweight contest for the WBA Intercontinental Female Super Bantamweight title. In that way, it's a step towards the full WBA title at this weight, the full WBA title that reigning champion Mayerling Rivas is in possession of. I don't see a lot of fighters, I don't see a lot of young up-and-comers angling towards a shot with her, but it appears that Elise Scotney is. It appears that she is attempting to take a step in that direction by taking on Jorgelina Guanini for this vacant title fight, and this is all set to go down on the undercard of Daniel Jacobs versus John Ryder in their super middleweight contest, their super middleweight fight. A great fight, I might add. More intriguing than...
You gotta wonder, does Danny Jacobs really have enough to take care of a guy like John Ryder these days?
Daniel Jacobs has a very accomplished middleweight resume, a former champion there, but guess what?
What?
This ain't middleweight. This ain't the middleweight division. And John Ryder...
It's been a while since Danny Jacobs had a fight.
Danny Jacobs hasn't fought since November of 2020 when he stunk out the place against Philadelphia's own Gabriel Rosario. Danny hasn't fought in over a year, whereas John Ryder saw action more recently in September of last year.
Just part of the Zone's comprehensive schedule of fights next month.
Starting next month. The year got off to a quiet start in the sport of boxing over there in the United Kingdom with that mandate and those COVID restrictions barring sport.
More specifically, the sport of boxing.
But boxing's coming back, and it's coming back in a big way over there in the United Kingdom next month, and this will be one of the first fights we see in the year of 2022. Elise Scotney versus Jorgelina Guanini on the undercard of Jacobs versus Ryder. Solid card, if I do say so myself. There is genuine intrigue associated with both of those fights. We don't know that here today, Danny Jacobs still has enough to fend off a guy like John Ryder. Danny Jacobs, who's still relatively new to the super middleweight division, hasn't really made a splash yet when it comes to Ellie. Rachel Ball struggled with Jorgelina Guanini over a year ago. It's conceivable that Ellie might as well, but if she doesn't, that's quite a statement.
Keep your eyes peeled for this early next month on the 12th.
In other news, per a tweet from Dan Rayfield, per his source, IBF issued a letter to both camps determining Tony Yoka is unavailable for Eliminator versus Filip Hrgovic for a mandatory position because of the dispute between the Yoka camp and the Martin Bacoli camp on if he owes him a rescheduled date. IBF will go down ratings yet again. First thoughts. Well, Martin Bakole wants that fight with Tony Yoka. He wants it rescheduled. And the worst thing that could happen for Martin Bakole, in my opinion, is him actually getting that fight because it's not business anymore.
Oh, it's personal now.
It is. Tony Yoka tried to move on to what I think is a bigger and better and more dangerous fight with a more dangerous fighter in Filip Hrgovic, but there was more on the line. The opportunity to become the IBF's mandatory challenger, an opportunity that might now go to Joe Joyce, since the IBF must go down their rank standings to find someone willing and able to fight Filip in this final eliminator.
You know, I already had Tony Yoka outpointing Martin Bakole.
Conservatively, my prediction was Tony Yoka on points in his own neck of the woods, Le France. I figured at minimum Tony can win a points decision over there. He can, but given how things have gone, the fact that Martin Bakole has pulled him back into this situation when he was ready to move on to a bigger and better fight, I think Tony's gonna give him what he wants. That fight might get rescheduled, and this time Tony might be looking for a knockout. He might be looking to make a statement. You wanted to fight, Martin?
You got it!
If I'm being honest, which really just means I'm being pessimistic, I've no faith in Joe Joyce taking up Filip Hrgovic on this IBF final eliminator. Not because I think Joe is afraid of Filip or anything like that, but there are politics involved once you involve Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce is a Frank Warren Queensberry Promotions fighter, whereas Filip, he's co-promoted by the Sarlin brothers and Matchroom. So that turns into a good old Matchroom versus Queensberry situation, and I'm not sure that the Queensberry people will be receptive to this. By the time this video is uploaded, how many fights have the politics of boxing costed us over the years? This might be another. This might be the latest. I've no faith that
Zero.
Joyce versus Hrgovic
None.
will be.
It's not happening.
I've no faith they'll get this fight over the line. I don't.
If and when they don't, Agit Kabayel is the next name in the queue.
Unbeaten Agit Kabayel, based out of Germany, and I don't know, maybe he'll take up the fight. He does have a victory over Derek Chisora, a victory that I think in some ways has aged well. Maybe Agit Kabayel will be the unbeaten fighter that decides to take this chance, steps up in competition, takes on Croatia's Filip Hrgovic. I don't know, but I can't see Joyce versus Hrgovic happening. I can't. If by some chance Agit Kabayel goes the same route that Joseph Parker, Luis Ortiz, Michael Hunter before them,
If Agit passes on a fight the same way they passed on a fight,
the next name in the queue would be the name of former unified cruiserweight champion, now turned heavyweight contender, Murat Gassiev.
he would be the next man in line if Agit passes on a fight.
Given that the last couple of years, Murat Gassiev has been injury-prone, sparsely active, his heavyweight campaign is nowhere near as exciting as his cruiserweight campaign was. I've always held to this thought that Murat, he really isn't going to make a splash as a heavyweight. Let's just be honest. He's an interesting guy up there, but he's better off at cruiserweight. Hell, I'd say he's better off at bridgerweight than heavyweight. He just doesn't have the physical dimensions to compete with the Tyson Furies, Tony Yokas, Filip Hrgovics, Anthony Joshuas of the world. He doesn't have the dimensions necessary to do so. I think he could be an interesting guy at heavyweight, but so far, has he been an interesting guy?
Let's just be honest. Do you guys out there think he wins a world title at heavyweight?
Just stop pussyfooting around. Why don't you cut the crap and ask yourself, do you think this guy's going to become a heavyweight champion in this era, in this lifetime? And do you think he's actually going to take up the IBF on this opportunity if it's presented to him? Because I don't see Joe Joyce taking this fight. I don't. And if Joe don't take it, it's going to go to Agit Kabayel. If Agit passes on it, it's then going to be offered to Murat Gassiev. And I don't see Murat taking this fight. I don't. And if and when he doesn't, if it should be presented to him, behind Murat Gassiev is former unified heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz Jr., which creates yet another political situation that we all know is not going to result in a fight, because Andy is a PBC fighter. Behind Andy is his PBC stablemate, former IBF champion Charles Martin, who's coming right off that loss to Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz, who already passed on the Hrgovic fight weeks ago. It's a strange situation. If I'm being honest, I haven't seen anything quite like this, to where the IBF has to go down their complete rank standings in order to find a guy a fight, a guy who hasn't even proven all that much at heavyweight. What I think should happen, Joe and Agit, Murat, they all pass on this thing? Hey, just instate Filip Hrgovic as the mandatory challenger, since nobody in your rank standings wants to fight him. Just fucking do it!
I don't see Joe Joyce taking this fight.
Agit Kabayel might not, and Murat Gassiev, Andy Ruiz Jr., Charles Martin, they might not either. So just instate him as the mandatory challenger and get it over with. In other news, per a tweet from Mike Coppinger, a name we haven't heard in a while, Sergey Kovalev and Fanlong have agreed to a March 12th fight in the LA area at 185-pound catchweight, a Triller Fight Club main event. Kovalev's first fight since 2019's KO loss to Canelo Alvarez. Full story coming to ESPN. 185-pound catchweight. That means that this is a cruiserweight contest of sorts, not being fought at the light heavyweight limit, light heavyweight, where Sergey once reigned as that division's unified champion. Long gone are those days. Fanlong was once Artur Beterbiev's IBF mandatory challenger, but in August of 2020,
Due to COVID restrictions.
Fanlong was out as the IBF's mandatory challenger, and Adam Dionise was in. That's who Artur Beterbiev subsequently went on to fight.
Unbeaten Fanlong of China.
Who was last in action late last year in October against Israel Dreyfus. Fanlong won a unanimous decision, maintaining his unbeaten record, unblemished.
Never did get that IBF Mando spot back though, did he?
No, he didn't. And because this Sergey Kovalev fight is being fought above the light heavyweight limit, one can deduce that this really won't count towards his rank as a light heavyweight.
And I get the sense this 185-pound catchweight accommodates Sergey more than it accommodates Fanlong.
Because Fanlong's last fight was, in fact, a light heavyweight contest, whereas Sergey, we haven't seen Sergey since 2019, thus making the light heavyweight limit would prove difficult for Sergey. 2 years out of action, 2 years away from the ring.
So I think that catchweight is intended to accommodate Sergey more than Fanlong.
In light of this, all I can think to myself is, my, how the mighty have fallen. Sergey Kovalev has been reduced to a 2-year hiatus from the sport, reduced to fighting on Triller, the fledgling app that's still trying their hand at staging boxing matches alongside very novel...
What's that thing called, the Trigon?
They're staging crossover fights with mixed martial artists and boxers that are getting long in the tooth. Old guys like Kubrat Pulev, inside of a ring shaped like a pizza slice.
They're calling it Triad Combat.
Kubrat Pulev is set to be making his second appearance in the Trigon very soon.
That's supposed to be next month, towards the end of it.
On the 26th. And in March, Sergey Kovalev will be fighting on Triller as well. Not in the Trigon, I don't think. In the boxing ring, the squared circle, against fellow boxer Fanlong.
At this time, you might remember that Sergey's got some unfinished business with Golden Boy Promotions.
Because Sergey Kovalev, the 38-year-old former champion, was supposed to box the then unbeaten Uzbek native Bektamir Melikuziev last January 30th in its zone main event. Kovalev was removed from that bout because he tested positive for synthetic testosterone, a banned substance. Kovalev's removal from that bout caused a contract dispute with Golden Boy Promotions, which owed Kovalev at least one fight after he lost to Canelo Alvarez as part of Oscar De La Hoya's company's distribution deal with DAZN. An arbitrator could rule on the Golden Boy Kovalev issue sometime next month.
And if the pendulum swings Kovalev's way,
that is, if Golden Boy is forced to give Sergey Kovalev another fight, I could see that fight coming in the form of Zurdo Ramirez, who has since integrated himself into the light heavyweight division, the light heavyweight ranked standings. Zurdo seems to have his eyes on a B-Vol fight, at least that's what he's saying. But I could see him fighting Sergey if the arbitrator rules in Sergey's favor. If the arbitrator doesn't rule in his favor,
I don't know, Golden Boy ain't got to do nothing for him.
maybe then they can send him packing and tell him to go fuck himself.
It's not Golden Boy's fault you got yourself ejected from that Melikuziev fight.
Really isn't Golden Boy Promotions' fault that they found synthetic testosterone in Sergey Kovalev's system ahead of what was supposed to be that Melikuziev fight. If not for that, they would have honored their end of the deal.
You fucked that up for yourself.
And just in keeping with the theme of light heavyweight news, anywhere at or around light heavyweight, Michael Benson tweeted, Frank Warren on Eddie Hearn's offer for Joshua Buatsi versus Anthony Yarde. He knows Yarde is now mandatory for Joe Smith Jr. If he's looking for somebody to fight Buatsi, Callum Johnson's there. Make an offer for that. Maybe he should make Callum Smith versus Buatsi.
Old Fish Eyes has got a point.
Callum Smith still is a matchroom fighter. Callum Smith, who very recently came in as the #1 ranked contender via the WBC's light heavyweight ranked standings. Would Callum Smith be receptive to a Joshua Buatsi fight, given that he's so close to challenging for a world title?
I don't think so.
I think, in all likelihood, Callum Smith is going to do what he's got to do until he can get a shot at the green belt. In the between time, what we might see Joshua Buatsi, is Buatsi versus Richards, Craig Richards.
I don't see them trying to reschedule that Vlasov fight.
Maxim Vlasov, who pulled out of the Felix Valera fight to fight Joshua Buatsi on a Matchroom show, just to have to miss out on that to go back to that Felix Valera fight, which he ended up having.
Remember, Joshua Buatsi was supposed to be injured.
That's why that Maxim Vlasov fight didn't happen, and that's why Maxim Vlasov ended up going back to that Felix Valera fight, which he won.
They're not going to revisit that fight.
Too much potential for that fight to be a banana skin for unbeaten Joshua Buatsi. In all likelihood, they'll make the Craig Richards fight.
I told you the Yarde people wasn't going to be receptive to a Buatsi fight.
I told you, now that Anthony Yarde is in a pole position to challenge for the WBO title, he's not going to gamble it on a Buatsi fight, and Frank Warren isn't about to do Eddie Hearn any favors, in spite of the request to start making fights with Eddie. Frank's boys versus Eddie's boys back in 2020.
Frank's not as gung-ho anymore.
It was Frank Warren beating the drum for Matchroom's boys to start taking on Queensbury's boys back in 2020. But since then,
It seems he's cooled off on that idea.
at least when it comes to the light heavyweights, at least when it comes to an Anthony Yarde versus Joshua Buatsi fight, his boy Anthony is in a pole position to challenge Joe Smith Jr. for the WBO title. And given that Joe
Smith Jr.
Joe Smith and his handler, Joe DeGuardia, given that they don't seem all that committed to the Artur Beterbiev unification match, the unification match that ahead of Joe's last fight he claimed he wanted so bad, they don't seem that committed to that fight here and now. We talked about that in my previous video. That could leave the door open for the Anthony Yarde people to apply pressure on the WBO to order that fight between them, that fight between
Joe Smith Jr. and Anthony Yarde.
Joe can circumvent his mandatory challenger by way of a unification match. All he's got to do is petition the WBO for an exemption.
Yeah, if he were actually unifying.
Though the way those guys are sounding, saying things like they're not going to wait around for Artur Beterbiev, you kind of get the sense they don't really want that fight all that bad. And if you're not unifying, what stops the WBO from ordering that fight?
Anthony Yarde is the next man in the queue.
It's a genuine possibility. We'll see how it all breaks down at 175 pounds.